Hello, everybody.
Hola.
Hello, I was having trouble finding the unmute button.
¿Cómo estás, señor Martin?
Yeah, hi. Karen Ann, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
I just want to say I regret not honoring your request at the last meeting to not be detained past time or past 9 o'clock.
That's okay. You know, I know we all get excited about our bylaws.
Well, it won't happen again.
Oh, I see. Hold on. I've got way too many. I am so knee deep in delegate allocations right now. I just can't even tell you. Managing 50 plus 1 states, because I send personal, you know me, little overachiever. So I send personal letters to each state chair, letting them know where they stand, how their delegate allocations have changed from year to year. And ooh, sometimes I wonder why I don't just go the easy way.
All right, that's a lot of letters.
Did the membership definitions get fixed for Civi?
I don't understand your question, and it might be something I can't answer, but I don't understand your question.
That was the that was one of the concerns over the delegate allocation, was the number of dues paying members and membership being defined differently.
Oh yeah, we have accurate numbers at this point.
Okay.
That's why there wasn't projections earlier. I like sending them starting about 6 months out rather than 4 months out, but I needed accurate numbers first.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it sucks that we lost one delegate, but
That's easy to gain.
Yeah.
But you know, gaining does depend upon, you know, what the other states do too, because it is a percentage of the whole. And if other states surge ahead, you can actually lose more, but you could probably count on probably a pretty steady, relatively consistent growth rate.
yeah.
But
there's always a rush right before the deadline too.
Yeah. But if your state, you know, really overachieves, you can jump ahead. So, you know, that's why I like giving people as much notice as possible.
I'm probably going to be in and out this meeting, so if I have a vote, I might give it up because I have family visiting, but I'll try to pay attention as much as I can.
Okay, doke. But by the way, Chuck, Pennsylvania lost 5 delegates.
Not at all surprising.
Just letting you know. Your chair knows.
Yeah, I'm not in Pennsylvania anyway. I'm in Tennessee, but
Oh, that's
but-
right. I forgot
but I'm not
about
surprised that Pennsylvania lost delegates.
that. Let me see. I think
It's all right, Mr. Moulton or Dr. Moulton. You're the only 10 I see.
Oh my God, that was so bad.
Thank you.
That was so bad. Let me see. All of this information is public, so I'm not telling anyone anything. The delegate allocation, well, obviously they're not final. It's like the preliminary, if the convention were tomorrow type thing, was posted on the LNC list. Tennessee, I think, gained one. Yep, Tennessee gained one.
It was posted on the LNC list?
Yep, you had to request access, but the link was posted on the LNC list.
Okay, because I saw the one thread that said that you had put it out to the chairs.
Yeah, I also put it out to the list so that the regionals can take a look at it. Now, obviously not the expired members. That's confidential information, the list of expired members, which I've also sent to the chairs. But the preliminary calculations, I want as many eyeballs on those as possible in case, you know, somebody goes, oh my God, there's a weird cell error, you know? I mean, this is the same spreadsheets that have been used since 2018, but that doesn't mean there isn't an error in it somewhere. So I definitely want as many eyeballs on it as possible, not just me.
And then we lost Becky. I saw that today.
Yes.
Good evening, all.
Good evening. And just as a point of reference for everybody, you know that the total number of delegates we have, I forget the exact number, Dr. Moulton would probably know this. It's within a range of between like 1,044 and 1,055, depending upon fractions and having members that don't reside in a state that has an affiliate. Well, it's not a state, but like if they're in a territory where there's no affiliate. So in 2022, our maximum delegates was 1,053. If the convention were tomorrow, because this number can change, our maximum delegates for 2024 is 1,048.
I'm a little confused why you mentioned the territories, because those are specifically excluded from
Right, that's what I
denominator.
said. No, that's right. No, that's exactly. They're not excluded from the denominator for
They are excluded.
percentage.
They are just
Not-
excluded from the
They're
denominator.
excluded for regions. They're not excluded for total number of national members.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll have to double check that. Okay.
Yeah, and I got that from Alicia. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
they're-
that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they got it wrong years ago for regions and I had to correct them, but
Yeah, it gets very confusing for people. I have to explain it like in the handbooks. Why is this number different, you know, than here? But for allocations, the total number of members, even in XX, you know how it's called XX on the report, those count for percentage of totals, but they don't count for regions.
One of the bylaws proposals includes a removal of the presidential vote percentages, doesn't it? For
we haven't-
delegate allocation?
We haven't reached that yet. But I do think there is one for that. I'm not sure if that's been officially submitted. You could look on the agenda and see. because it's a rolling agenda, so everything on there is everything that's been submitted so far. I know it was at least talked about on the list. I can't remember if it's been submitted.
Okay. Well, this meeting's at town hall, right? Or is that the next one?
No, this is not a town hall. We're gonna talk about when the town hall will be, because there was a little bit of differing information, not information, opinions on when that should be, and that obviously will be a committee decision, not a unilateral decision of me. So that will certainly be discussed.
Okay. That's probably one proposal that I'll put in the town hall. Simplify thing.
Hold on, I'm letting people in the waiting room and closing down windows. Need to close my secretary email box so that doesn't accidentally get shared. Oh, everyone's coming in late. Oh, actually, it's a minute early. We're going to be giving it about
Eric.
about 3 minutes before we start. And I'm opening up the agenda.
JJ. Oh, that was. Yes.
Before you start, Madam Chair, I heard that you've heard from a friend of mine, Ms. DeGangi.
Yes, and I did text her back, I believe.
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. I was like, did I not? Did I not? I've been so busy. This time of year is like one of the craziest times of year to be the party secretary.
I can imagine. Yes, one day you will hopefully be reading an article that will include a section called the DeGangi case.
Okay, so she's giving you something to write about as well. Yeah, my streaming and everything is going to be seriously curtailed while I am concentrating on upcoming convention. Because there's a lot of work to do in manuals to write. Okay, the agenda is up. We are 2 minutes out. Let me pull up the Zoom screen here. There's someone I still need to let in. I'm going to share my screen.
So. Tell me what they.
So you should be seeing the agenda. The chair will be calling the meeting to order. It'll be 6:47 Mountain Time, 8:47 Eastern Time. And Madam Secretary, when you're ready, if you could please take the attendance.
All right, Arrowwood here, Rocco,
Present.
Sazelsky,
Here.
Carlos,
Present.
Latham,
Here.
Martin,
Present.
Ken Moman. I'll call him later. Tom Rowlett.
Here.
All right. Mike Ruffo.
Here.
Thank you. Mike Seebeck.
Here.
All right. Ken Moman. Madam Chair, Ken Moman has not checked in as yet. So,
Okay, so it looks like Dr.
place-
Moulton will be sitting in his place, but if you wanted to call the roll of the alternates as well.
sure. Chuck Moulton is here,
Here.
number 1. Dave Roberson, number 3.
Here.
Okay. Rick Tomaso. Rick Tomaso not here. Greg Deal. Greg Deal. Roger Roots. Roger Roots. Dean Rogers. Madam Chair, Dr. Moulton's been moved up to regular status, and Dave Roberson 3 and Data Logan 6 are present.
Hey, thank you. Mr. Molman did text me earlier. He's been really busy, was
I,
confused
I
whether,
just talked to him on the phone. He'll be on in a minute. Just looking
Okay.
for the email.
All right.
okay, yeah, because I knew he was confused whether it was going to be, whether it was this week or next week. Before we get to public comment, there was a little bit of I don't want to say controversy because it was really quite amicable about when our next town hall would be. And I had suggested August 24th, and there was some commentary and that this was too soon. Because we might be in the middle of some important proposals, and it was suggested that we instead have it on September 7th. September 7th is not possible for me, as that will be one of the meetings where I have a mandatory attendance at a county convention where I don't have to like really participate, but I have to be there for quorum purposes and might have to vote on a few things. And I think that would be somewhat rude to members coming for a town hall not to have the bylaws committee chair full attention. But I'm also persuaded that August 24th might be too soon, not just because we're in the middle of some important proposals, but because I forgot there's an LNC meeting on August 18th through 19th or 17th through 18th. And if you know anything, those of you who are former secretaries of the LNC know, the weeks immediately prior to and immediately after an LNC meeting are a certain level of Dante's Inferno as far as prep work between doing minutes and everything else. So instead of August 24th or September 7th, I'm asking the committee if they would be amenable to the town hall being September 14th. And there's another good reason for that. Is the way the National Party does emails now is they are really planned out like 2 weeks in advance. And with the convention coming up, there's all kinds of convention promos that are stacked in line because, you know, the reservation links going out, the prices are going out. I'm not so sure that I could even get in an email quickly enough to make a town hall meaningful for it to be sooner than September 14th. So That is what I'm suggesting. I'd like to hear input from the committee. Mr. Bracco.
Yes, so I don't believe that we currently have a meeting scheduled for September 14th. I think it's September 7th and then the September 21st, if we're going by.
I meant
I
the
guess it-
21st. I
okay.
meant the 21st. My
Okay.
mistake. I meant to add 14. There's a reason I'm not the treasurer of the party. Me and numbers sometimes don't get along. So thank you. I meant the 21st. I meant the next meeting after the 7th. So is there an objection from the committee to have, and I know our Zoom links don't go out that far, and Mr. Molman is entering the room right now. I am going to be setting up the new set of Zoom links. But is there any objection from the committee for setting our next town hall for September 21st? Was that it, Mr. Bracco?
Yes,
Okay,
assuming we're holding the every other
Yes.
Thursday schedule.
all right, hearing no objection, that then will be the next town hall. And that will give me time, because as you may recall from the last town hall, I do prepare a packet, for attendees with showing where we're at. And that actually is quite a multi-hour long project. So that will give me sufficient time to do that and do LNC minutes and other duties that I need to do during this very busy time. So this now leads to public comment. If any member that's not the committee would like to offer public comment, please raise your hand. And as is usually said, if there's a member of the committee that has something that they would like to say that doesn't really fall under any agenda item, you are certainly welcome to participate in public comment as well. So I do see Mr. Madden's hand raised. So Mr. Madden, you have the floor.
Hello, hello. I see that there are 22 people signed in for this meeting. And I just want to say to everyone, thank you for coming. Thank you for participating. Thank you for being part of the process. It's very important that the membership does, as it's good for all involved. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to see this as well. The chair does have to apologize somewhat in that the notice did not go up on lp.org, even though it said on a prior notice. It's recurring, and it was obviously on our public list and on the LNC list. It's just been a super, super busy couple of weeks that we'll try for that not to happen again. But I literally was swamped. August is a very, very busy month for the party secretary. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in public comment? All right, seeing none, we shall move on to, we have 2 sets of minutes to approve. I know one of these, I see a couple hands already. Is this about minutes? Ms. Arrowood, is this public comment and you just did not get your hand up in time?
No, but I wanted to note for the record that Dean Rogers, alternate 7, is now present.
Thank you. Mr. Molman?
I just wanted to note that I was present. I apologize for the delay in coming.
Okay, no problem. So there are 2 sets of minutes. There were revisions to what set was it, Ms. Arrowood, that you posted just prior to this meeting?
I believe July 13.
Okay, so the link that is on the screen is not to the most current version. The most current version you will see in your email box, because when I'm preparing for the meeting, things sent right before the meeting do not make it onto the agenda. If everyone can take a quick look at them, they've already been postponed once. The chair would really like to avoid postponing them again. So if you could take a quick look at those, but first, since you need to take a look at those. The chair asks, is there any objections to the draft July 27th ones that were posted earlier in the week? Seeing no objection, the July 27th meeting minutes are approved. Let's go back to the July 13th ones. Is there any objection to the latest version, which was posted today on the Bylaws Committee list, to approving those minutes? I believe Mr. Latham had a question, however. Do you still have that question, Mr. Latham?
No, most of my stuff were like typos and formatting things, and Sylvia and I communicate offline, and she can kind of do that on her own without
Okay.
us having to correct
So
them.
non-substantive, gotcha.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right. Seeing no objection, then those minutes are approved. So we have that now off our plate. And we are back to what seems like, is it the fourth meeting on this proposal? This proposal will be perfect. I'm going to pull it up, and I see Mr. Latham's hand raised. So let me pull it up first. Let's all reacquaint ourselves to the point at which we left off. And I know there was a primary motion and there was a substitute. And we were back on the primary motion. And Mr. Latham can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe where we left off was debate on striking, as on the screen, what was 6A in the primary motion and substituting in the highlighted language, which would then subsequently re-letter the other ones because it broke A into AB. So what was previously B would then become C. That is pro forma. We don't need to do markup language on that. That is where we left off. So debate is appropriate at this point. And I'm looking for hands. Unless we're ready to go to a vote, perhaps. Who was this moved by? Was it Mr. Sozelski? The highlighted language?
I didn't move it.
No.
Why did I think it was you? Was it Mr.
thought-
Roulette?
I had thought it was Mr. Martin.
Was it Mr. Martin?
I think it was actually, yeah.
Did you wish to do any kind of recap or refresher on this to get debate started or move us to a vote? And then I'd recognize Mr. Molman.
I think the amendment is pretty self-explanatory here. It looks like the only difference is the word enables is changed to produces.
And I believe, if you'll indulge me, you also borrowed language from the substitute about the process of delivering the ballot to the delegation chair who places it in the envelope, because that was
right.
missing from the primary. I believe my recollection is correct on that.
Okay, yeah, that's probably right. Yeah, I wasn't looking at B. Okay, yeah, I'll leave it where it sits. I don't have anything to add.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I have Mr. Molman and then Mr. Latham. Mr. Molman.
Yes. If I remember, what we were trying to do was get to a require a physical ballot versus not require a physical ballot. For this to pass, we will require a physical ballot on either alternative. And I oppose requiring a physical ballot. So I'm going to be voting against this amendment only because I want to have the opportunity to have the face-off between requiring and not requiring a physical ballot. Because in my opinion, Requiring a physical ballot simply adds more to the process and will actually slow our tallies down. So that is my opinion. And there we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Molman. Mr. Latham.
And I maybe just following up on that, I believe that's right, but I thought we were so close almost on consensus. There was even discussion about voting on this change by email ballot. Thought I held off on asking for that because it just seemed like we might need a little more discussion or at the beginning of this meeting anyway. But I think that's ultimately where the discussion ended up. Was there's a majority on this committee that thinks that just going purely electronic is a little premature. We need to work into that. And I will say the nice thing about, I think, this proposal is that we don't have to worry. I had a concern like, how are we going to audit a purely electronic vote? And now we don't have to worry about that because it's made auditable by producing these physical ballots. In looking at the old minutes or from our last meeting, I think there was a discussion about, we'll display the results on the screen, and then if there's a request for a recount, then we can count the actual printed things. But I mean, hopefully not, this doesn't open up a can of worms, but I think we're still saying by this that the ultimate authority is going to be those physical ballots. So I think you're not really announcing the results. You might say they're preliminary results based on what the electronic process yields, but ultimately, what's on the physical ballots is going to determine what the official vote is. I hope that makes sense.
I'm going to treat that slightly as a parliamentary inquiry and somewhat as an inquiry to me and my other hat. I don't believe that's correct. The electronic ballot is the result unless a recount is ordered. A recount requires a majority vote of the delegates. So it can't be just one person, being like, I don't like it. So no, the results, unless there's a recount, is the electronic ballot. Did you have a follow-up to that, Mr. Latham, before I recognize Mr. Bracco?
Well, I'll just say I'm good either way. I guess I can just see different interpretations, and I guess I'll say that the way our language is, that's right. I guess one scenario I had envisioned was we do the electronic process just to show delegates and ourselves how quickly that can crank out results as opposed to hand counting paper. But I think there's going to be a constituency out there that says we don't trust electronics and we want, the paper stuff. And I guess if they muster a majority to do a recount, then that's the direction we go. So yeah, I guess I like the chair's clarification that we get to enjoy the time-saving benefits of electronic balloting, but we have this paper backup, physical ballot backup if we need it.
And also, though this isn't in our rules, and this is custom, the LNC secretary would use the paper ballots to do an after convention audit. That audit doesn't ever change anything. It's used just to make suggestions for improvement because it notices little weird things. Mr. Bracco.
So I think that if this proposal were to fail, then it creates a problem for us. Looking specifically at, I'm going to call it 6D, even though it would change if this were to pass. If under the existing language, the currently on the screen struck out 6A, if the system were to enable the printing of the physical ballot, but not actually do it, then it could throw any potential recount into question if a recount were to be called, because then you have to go and after the fact, after you've seen the results and a recount has been ordered, then go print it. And then that raises a lot of questions for people. I think that if you're going to do a recount using physical ballots, then those physical ballots have to be printed prior to the like displaying of the results on the screen. So if we don't want to do that, then this amendment were to fail, then we have to address 6D. Like that, we can't go forward voting this amendment down and leaving 6D as it is.
Thank you, Mr. Bracco. That is one thing I was going to say, though, of course, we certainly can vote this down and then deal with 6D. I can tell you, I'm in favor of this amendment. I'm so in favor of this amendment that I will vote against my own substitute if this amendment passes, because I think this cures all of the issues I had. I do think that the majority, if I'm reading the room correctly, either wants personally or believes what has the best chance of passing is something that has a physical ballot until there's trust, and that it might be a later amendment at a future convention that would perhaps go to surely electronic. But one thing I would advise the committee is, if this passes like this, several people can do a minority report that doesn't have any of this, though there isn't a guaranteed right that a minority report will be heard. But I'm going to remind the committee what I said last time. I'm not going to call it like a red herring, because that implies some kind of purposeful deception. I think it's an inadvertent red herring to say this is about whether or not we're going to be surely electronic or not. I think what this is ultimately about, it's like on a presentation I gave this weekend, when people ask who will build the roads, they're not really asking about the roads. And I don't think this is really about whether or not we have a physical ballot. I think it's about whether or not we can do a meaningful recount that people will trust if a recount is ordered. I think that's the real issue here that's getting disguised inadvertently by this discussion of whether we have a printed ballot or not. If this committee decides it doesn't want there to be a meaningful recount, and what I mean by meaningful is, if the recount is ordered, that means you already have distrusting delegates. And if you just say we're going to have the machine run the numbers again, that's not going to cure the distrust that caused the vote for a recount to begin with. If we want to foreclose the opportunity of a recount that will, I think, keep party peace in a very close election, in a convention that seem to be getting more and more contentious each year, I think we need this physical ballot. That's going to be up to the committee. If my vote will count, I am going to be supporting this amendment. Thank you. Mr. Molman.
Yes, so I started thinking during this discussion, what is it this amendment actually fundamentally do? So if this passes, both will effectively do the same thing. They're going to require a physical ballot to be printed. And I'm looking at that, the fundamental difference. Today, we have the option to use computer readable ballots. That is the wording that they use, the phraseology, basically a Scantron style ballot. Though Scantron is a trademark, so you can't say Scantron. But that is essentially what they account for in today's bylaws. And today it's an option. We don't have to use the computer readable, and we don't have to print all those ballots, and we don't have to do that. We can just keep doing what we've been doing, because it's a pain in the butt to print a lot of ballots, and we don't do that, and you have to have the machinery to read it. My concern is that we're actually, I think, making the process worse. We are going to now require that the ballots, if we go to an electronic system, right, rather than having the option to electronic and print, now if we do electronic, we must print. Right? I work in IT. There are two things I hate in the world more than anything else: modems and printers. and fax machines are a combination of the two, an abomination. Printers break. They stop printing. We stop. Does convention business come to a halt because we're required to print? I would say yes. Convention business comes to a halt because we're required to print. Or we go back to just doing it voice vote like we already did. I think what we're going to end up with, if this passes, is that we will not adopt electronic voting, that the first one or two that happen might happen, and then people are going to want to revert back to the voice vote because it's taking longer than it used to take with the voice vote, with the other mechanisms. And so, yes, if this does not pass, 6D did need work, and I had a motion that I was going to make, and this jumped in ahead of it in the last meeting. And unfortunately, I'm driving at the moment. I had to go shopping. I have to buy groceries for the family to eat and stuff. Stupid family letting me eat. But I'll be home shortly, and I'll find my language. But the 6D does need to be fixed if we don't. But I had hoped that we could have an actual face-off, and maybe this amendment is the face-off. I guess it is now, on whether or not we're going to require physical printing of ballots. But you know, I don't think this improves the process. I think it only actually discourages the use of electronic voting, not encouraging it. So that's just my opinion. You know, and everybody has one. So thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Molman. Because Mr. Roulette hasn't spoke, Robert, if you don't mind, I'm going to let the several
good.
people. Okay, Mr. Roulette.
Just talking about what Mr. Molman said. In this case, I understand what he's saying, but given that this process would only be in use when there's going to be a physical ballot anyway, I don't really see that we're creating an extra step here. I mean, we sort of are, because we have to print ballots rather than use a 3x5 index card, which is what we usually do. I don't, and if we were to print out those ballots, well, thinking out loud, if we were to print those ballots well before the convention happened, like if we just had ballots standing by, and then people fill out what the ballot is for while they're filling out the ballot, doesn't that? I'm just not as concerned that adding printers to this process, it would be so destructive when you're already dealing with paper or a paper equivalent anyway. I could be wrong.
And just to bring up, that is one of the differences in the substitute is that the substitute doesn't have printers. The substitute has the delegate fill out a physical ballot at the same time they do the electronic one. So if persons have a big concern over possibility of printers breaking, you know, maybe they want to amend this further later to have it as printed or contemporaneous, if you remember that whole discussion, but that was one of the differences. Dr. Moulton?
Yes, I just want to say I completely agree with Mr. Molman. I mean, I see efforts to add a printable ballot or physical ballot to electronic ballot, and it's just the poison pill. I mean, it takes a good proposal to save us a lot of time doing these things with, I mean, people have been voting electronically in one form or another for many, many years. People know how electronic voting works, basically. And instead of speeding things up, this is going to slow things down. And I think it's a poison pill that will make people not like electronic voting for reasons that really have nothing to do with electronic voting, just because we're adding this crazy thing that does not need to be included. So I will be voting no on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton. I have Ms. Arrowood, then I'm going to go to Mr. Latham because Mr. Bracco, I think, has spoken before, but I wanted to get the people who haven't spoken yet. So Ms. Arrowood.
Yes, I've heard the phrase delegates don't trust, but I was thinking also a very close election or dicing over 1 or 2 votes could certainly cause a recount and a request for some kind of backup.
Did we lose you, Ms. Arrowood, or was that the completion of the thought?
That was it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Oh.
Mr. Latham?
Sure, and maybe just following up on Ms. Arrowood's point, so when we start talking about maybe more complex voting methods where we have to go round by round and whether there's a tie vote in one round or they're separated, by a couple votes, yeah, that could, I think, increase the possibility for a recount. So that's when questions about the system are going to be at its highest, and people are going to doubt if we just have all electronic, what actually happened. On the printer thing, I would think that one of the smart solutions would be, the convention committee or delegation chairs or whatever would make sure that there are, several printers around the convention hall, maybe 10. And then each election they would have to print out 100 ballots that the delegates would then collect and deliver them to their delegation chairs. So that's one method. But then to the point that this requires printing, it does not. As our committee chair mentioned, we've got that second clause, we've got the workaround. So if things break down or we just want to do it that way for whatever reason, we could have 3x5 cards. The delegates can contemporaneously vote electronically through, again, their tablet or their phone or their laptop or, whatever. And then they also fill out that card. But that card, so that card's going to be ultimately the one that counts if there's a recount, but we don't necessarily have to do printing.
Thank you, Mr. Latham. Mr. Bracco?
So to me, this seems like the ultimate question here is, how do we do recounts in a way that people trust? So there's multiple different answers that are kind of like on the board right now. Either have it print, have the delegates fill out something at the same time and collect it. But ultimately, then the recounts, whether it's printed or filled out, are done using the paper ballot. If there is no paper ballot, and I think this might be a question to the folks who are most heavily pushing for not passing this. If there are no physical ballots, either at the time or afterwards, what is the recount plan? Is it just have the computer run the numbers again, or is it something more complicated? Because it's hard for me to say I want to vote this down when there isn't really an alternative yet presented.
Okay, here's what I'm going to do, because I think that's very fair. I'm going to ask Mr. Molman, and if he wishes, Dr. Moulton, to answer your point, your request for information once I say what I got in line to say, and then I'm going to give the floor to them because I'm going to be very quick. I wanted to rebut the assertion by Mr. Molman that if our printers break down, that we just can't have an election, because I think everyone's missing in part A there's a backup plan built into the system. If for some reason it can't print, we will go back to the 3x5 index cards like we're already doing. And I, in fact, think that is what delegates are going to vote to do. Because multiple printers are a pain in the butt when you're dealing with one system, and then you have to have these networked printers. That's probably a point of failure. I think what's going to happen if this passes is we'll do the electronic voting and they're going to fill out their index card. And that takes no more time than we're already doing. I think we're pushing the panic button completely unnecessarily. I would now like if Mr. Molman wishes to answer the question by Mr. Bracco, how would recounts be done if there were no physical ballot?
Right. So in that scenario, right, in my mind anyway, and I'm not speaking for everyone that wants a purely electronic ballot, but in my mind, that is the decision, right? Do you trust the voting system or not, right? And that's why we have that vote up front at the beginning of the convention, why we're putting that into the agenda. Do you trust the system or not? And that's the decision point. Because the reality is that just like any electronic voting system, it can be rigged. Any voting system can be rigged, right? It's a matter of how do you know it's not being rigged? Well, that's part of having to convince people why the convention gets to decide if they want to, right? And why we require publishing about the system early and up front and require all that information ahead. Ask those questions and get their answers about, is this system secure? Is this system fair? Is this system one that I trust? Right?
So
And
Mr.
that is, I think, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to let you continue. I just want to make sure for the record and for Mr. Bracco, your answer is it would just be a recount of, it would just be running the numbers again. Because you went into a debate on a different point other than the request for information, which is fine because committees are looser. I just want to make sure before we get into further debate, that he has a really succinct answer to his question.
Yes, and I am trying to get there. I apologize if I'm not getting there fast enough. I guess my point is there is no recount in the case.
Gotcha.
Just like if there was an online poll, like it's just done. Like you cast your vote, it's done.
Gotcha.
There's no more. And the provision there is that's why that other stuff is up front, because there is no real mechanism to do that. You can run the numbers again. Woohoo! It's the same numbers. It's the same vote.
Well, there could have been
and
like a 401 error or some kind of weird thing in which having the computer run the numbers again would be meaningful.
Sure, or a scenario, and you know, again, without having architected it, I can come up with all kinds of stuff. You could have a system that makes sure that it tracks that a particular voter has voted and that their vote has been cast. You could create a system that allows a voter to check on their vote. I don't know how I feel about that, but you could. There are lots of possibilities as long as we leave it open enough that, you know, what we're trying to do in the bylaws committee is enable something, not box it. Or maybe we are trying to box it, but in my mind, that's why I'm making the arguments that I'm making, are that I'm just trying to enable it, and then the whether or not it can be audited, how the actual mechanisms work, all that stuff would have to be figured out and approved by the convention body at the beginning of the convention. So if there's a mechanism for recounts, great. If not, then again, it's really going to be up to the convention body to decide if they like that system or not. That's what I guess is the core point.
Dr. Moulton, are you still here? I saw in chat that you said you had to leave. Okay, so we're not going to be able to hear from Dr. Moulton on this. I suspect his answer would be similar. Are you back in line, Mr. Molman?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you. Just a little chair's note here before we go to further debate. This debate is starting to get super repetitive. I am going to get to a point where we need to get to a vote on this rather than repeating the same things. However, everyone that's in line, you're going to get to say what you want to say, but this is just a fair warning. I want to answer a point that has not been answered. No, I do not believe it's accurate to say that the expression of trust is the initial vote to use it. I'm going to give examples of LNC elections. I voted for people at a convention that at the time of the vote, I trusted them. And then once I saw them in action, I didn't trust them anymore. So I don't think seeing a system you haven't seen actually operate at the approval of agenda is your consent that you trust it the entire time. I think that's a completely fallacious argument. Mr. Bracco.
So is there any, this, I guess I have like sort of a two-parter. First one is going to be a parliamentary inquiry, and then the second one, I have some commentary, but I'll let Mr. Molman sort of jump that line. I'll get back in line for that, if that's all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I'll put you right. I'll call upon you right after Mr. Molman. Mr. Molman.
Well, hold on. The first
I'm
one,
sorry.
the first one is
Oh.
the parliamentary inquiry, and I would like
Oh,
to do that
I missed that.
first.
Sorry.
So does Robert's rules require and I guess in a way that our convention rules would like not be able to override any type of recount? Like if you don't have a recount, the election's not valid and nothing you can say like, okay,
No,
so there's
Ms.
nothing in Robert's that
No,
requires
Ms.
it.
Arrowood, please don't. I'll answer that. And if I'll answer the parliamentary inquiry. Under Roberts, the delegates can order that we pass out paper ballots and redo it. The delegates can order a recount, and they can order a recount physically because it says electronic balloting may be used. This is a convention rule that can be suspended, and they can say, I do not trust this, and we're gonna redo it using physical ballots that the LNC secretary will be absolutely unprepared to do. So that's another thing here when we're doing our esoteric discussions, to remember, you've got to enable the convention officials to be able to be prepared for things that can happen. So did that answer your question?
Yes, but it kind of created a follow-up. When you're saying that the delegates could order this would
Yes.
be suspending the rules with a 2/3 vote.
Yes.
Is that accurate? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
It's a real tricky thing. That would be my interpretation. Of course, that ruling would have to be made by the convention chair. The convention chair and the delegates obviously ultimately would have the final word on this. But as committee chair, that's my opinion, for whatever that's worth. So did you want to now wait for Mr. Molman and then you had further?
Yes, it's created in another parliamentary inquiry in my head. And
Okay, let's
I'll
let
skip it.
Mr. Molman have
Yes.
his say.
yes,
Mr. Molman.
Yeah, I guess even with the fallback we're going to have a written ballot and the electronic ballot. Now we've got two ballots cast in the same election with no guarantees they're the same. I mean, I know libertarians are funny people. For example, one of my folks here, we had a special election back in the day when Massey first went into office, and just to be a silly willy, he voted, because it was a special election and the regular election on the same ballot, because it was a month to fill the gap between the end of the previous term and the next term. And he voted for the Democrat, whoever the hell that was, in the special, and then voted for Massey in the general, right? Even though they were on the same ballot. And I have concerns that if we're casting two ballots in the same election, because that's really what it would be, because there's no guarantee they're the same, there's also that concern too. So I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here. I just think we're adding extra steps, but I'm done. I'm done arguing it. That's that. So
Thank you, Mr. Molman. Now, Ms. Arrowood, I think you had something that you'd wanted to say. If you disagree with the answer I gave, please do.
No, I just wanted to give the quote at Roberts at 4542. It said, if the devices are to be used for an election, provision must be made to allow voters to cast write-in votes.
Right, but this wasn't about write-ins. This was about recounts, and
Okay.
we do have it that it allows write-in votes. If we want to prohibit write-in votes, we have to put that in the bylaws, not in a rule.
All right.
Mr. Rogers, since you haven't spoken already, then we'll go back to Mr. Bracco.
Thank you, ma'am. I wanted to address Mr. Molman's concern about having an electronic ballot and a physical ballot that could be different. And I would like to suggest in paragraph A, 6A, that at the end of each sentence, there's 2 sentences in there, they both end with the word ballot. If that word were changed to record, then we'd be talking about casting an electronic ballot that produces a conforming physical record of that cast ballot. And so you're not referring to 2 ballots, you're referring to a ballot and the record of that ballot. So I don't know whether I'm making a motion to amend that or not, but that's a legit concern, and that's a way to resolve it, because now we're just talking about 1 ballot and the record of that 1 ballot. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Bracco?
Sure. So I'm inclined to vote for this as is, but I recognize that there is a debate to be had here. I just don't think that the debate really matters on this committee. So while I think I'm going to support this amendment, I would be open, and I'm just sort of like putting this out, I would be open to signing on to a minority report to allow that debate to happen at the convention by the delegates, which is where I think it really matters. Because I think it's in a debate that should happen, I think. I'm not sure it matters here. So let's just put forward basically 2 and let them pick.
Just an FYI, though, there's no guarantee of a minority report. However, any member of this committee can go and debate if you're a delegate and offer amendments. I know some people get confused about that when if you're on a committee, whether you can go and argue against a committee proposal, you can. The one thing Robert says you can't do is reveal what was discussed in committee. I don't think that's applicable to this committee, because our committee meetings are published on YouTube and everyone already knows what we've said. I think that's more applicable to committees that aren't open. But anybody on this committee can go and make amendments as well, because there isn't the guaranteed right to a minority report, but a minority report is usually better thought through than an amendment made on the fly on the floor. So it's often a good idea to have that, because some of the worst bylaws are created by people trying to do amendments on the fly. I wanted to just address Mr. Rogers' point. I actually think changing the word to record causes more problems, because recounts are of ballots. They aren't of records. It says it has to be conforming, which means it has to be identical. So it really is 1 ballot that's just produced 2 different ways. That's just wording wise. I think adding the word record there adds problems, but that's my, I could be wrong. Okay, looking for any other hands. Otherwise, we're going to be going to a vote. Okay, it looks like we will be going to vote. The chair will explain what we're voting on so that everyone is clear. A yes vote will strike out 6A, which is shown as stricken out on the screen, but it will make that final, and substitute in all of that highlighted language, which will then subsequently re-letter the rest of those that haven't been touched. So a yes vote will do that. A no vote will get rid of all that highlighted language and keep the original A. Madam Secretary, if you could do a roll call vote when you're ready.
Arrowwood, no. Rocco,
And sorry, I had a massive brain fart. Yes is to replace what's stricken out with what's highlighted. No is to keep what's stricken out. Is that
Correct.
okay? Yes.
Sazelsky,
I vote yes.
Latham,
Yes.
Frank Martin,
Yes.
Ken Molman,
No.
Rowlett,
Yes.
Rufo,
Yes.
Seebeck.
Abstain.
Madam Chair, at this point, we have 6, 2, and 1. You
That
can
will,
vote.
no, I will not. So this passes. So let me just fix the screen, and I do see Mr. Seebeck has his hand raised. I'll call upon him once I get this a little cleaned up here. Want to take this highlighting out, and let's re-letter these so we don't get confused if there are, whoops, why'd I do that at the end? That it was done right here.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, before you get, oh, maybe it's too late, sorry. I was gonna ask an inquiry if it's,
Oh, go ahead, right ahead.
is it possible to save the language in some way? Do we have that archived before this amendment?
It will be on the video.
Okay, that's fine.
Mr. Seebeck.
Yeah, just a question. Do we have another alternate available?
Yes, well,
Okay.
Yes,
Ms.
it- Mr. Roberson has, Mr. Moulton had stepped out, so it would be Roberson, number 3.
Okay, I need to step away for a minute. I have a mess I gotta clean up here in the house.
okay, so Mr. Roberson will be sitting in until Mr. Seebeck returns. So we are now still perfecting the primary motion. Are there any further amendments to the primary motion? Okay, seeing none. Procedurally, then, the motion before the body is between the substitute, which is in purple, and the blue, which is the primary. And the question is, shall the substitute proposal become the primary motion, or shall the primary motion remain the live motion on the floor? So a yes vote will get rid of all of the blue that we've been working on and replace it with the purple that we had worked on previously. A no vote will get rid of all of the purple, and we will be on the blue, at which point we'll have to then vote to pass the blue. So it's going to be 2 votes unless people come up with further amendments. Technically, and I'm going to say this before we go to the vote, even though I'm not big on enforcing this, particularly in committees. Technically, when you say you're done perfecting between a primary and a substitute, and I'm really telling you guys this more for when you go home, you know how to do it properly. You're not allowed to amend the primary further, except to add language. You can't mess with everything. Now, am I going to be super strict about that on a committee? No, because pretty much anyone can reconsider it. Those rules are very relaxed. Just want to let you know this for when you go home to your states. So again, where we are at in voting, a yes vote will make the substitute the primary motion. A no vote will get rid of the substitute, and we will be with the blue language. Ms. Arrowood, if you could take a roll call vote.
Arrowwood, I'm going to pass. Rocco,
Madam Chair, before we vote, it's not an amendment to either one, but I do have an inquiry, I guess.
Okay, we need to stop doing this.
It-
Once a vote starts, we can't be interrupting. I'm gonna allow it this time, but we can't do this again. You got to get in your inquiries before I ask the secretary to take the roll call. So what is your inquiry, Mr. Bracco?
Is there procedurally any difference between these? There's wording differences, but procedurally.
This is getting, okay, I'm saying we're not at a point of voting. We're reopening debate. This is not related to voting procedure. These types of things need to be asked ahead of time. Procedurally, let me just look quickly and I'll give you my opinion as LNC secretary. Other people may have different opinions. Procedurally, yes. In this one, delegates are required to do the 3x5 cards. And the other one, there is an option that if the software can print it out, it has to be either or. So really, that's the main difference between the two.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Rolette.
Sorry, I just noticed this. In the purple language, if this motion is out of order, it's fine.
Oh, no, we can,
Um,
before we go to a vote between the two, they're both fully open to amendment. So if there's something you would like to amend in the purple, you are perfectly able to do that.
All right, in the purple 6, I'd like to replace the word state with the word affiliate.
Okay, so very similar to what's up above. Would you like to speak to that?
No, thanks.
And I'm going to ask, is there any objection to this? It is a change that was made in the primary. Okay, seeing none. Okay, is there any further debate or amendment to either the primary or the substitute? Okay, now we are ready for the vote I described before. I'll describe it once again. A yes vote will make the substitute the primary motion, which would require an additional motion to pass. A no vote will get rid of the substitute entirely, and the blue will be what's live on the floor, which will then also require an additional vote to pass. Ms. Arrowood, when you're ready to take the roll.
All right. I'm going to say no. Rocco,
No.
Szelski,
No.
Latham,
No.
Martin,
No.
Molman,
Same.
I believe he said abstain, Madam Secretary.
oh, okay. Might be sure. Rowlett,
Yes.
Rufo,
No.
Mr. Roberson, David Roberson, sitting in for Seebeck.
Yep, you're voting right now. Mr. Seebeck had to step away.
No.
Can you guys hear me? My vote is no.
Yes, I believe the secretary got that. I'm
Okay,
just
sorry.
waiting for her to give me the count. I mean, it didn't, the substitute is stricken, and we're on the blue, but just for the record, if she could give the count, I will not be voting. My vote will not make a difference.
All right. We have 1 yes, 7 no's, and 2 abstains.
Okay, so the primary motion is now the motion on the floor, As I said, technically, you really can't change it any further except to add things. But because we're on a committee that has a bit more relaxed, if there's something pressing here that for some reason we missed in the past 4 meetings, which can happen, speak now, or we're going to a vote on passing this out of the committee. Mr. Bracco.
I would just ask that we pause for maybe a minute or so that everybody can read through it in its entirety.
I have no problem with that. Mr. Molman?
Yeah, as a matter of inquiry, is there debate once we get back to this, now that it is the main motion, or is it?
Yes,
just
there
we're just
can
gonna
be
do a vote?
debate. There certainly can be
Okay.
debate. Would you like to?
All right, I would.
Go right ahead, Mr. Molman.
I would just like to point out that I still think that this system is inferior to what we do today. Today, the computer readable ballots have to be filled out and then fed into the computer, which reads them, which is one vote cast, one authoritative. Recounts make sense because you run things through a machine again to recount, or you can hand count. Whereas the proposal now purports to that no libertarian in the entire caucus, the entire convention, is going to mark one thing on one thing and do something else on the other. Or, you know, maybe they punched the wrong thing on the computer and who cares? I'll just fix the ballot. There's nothing that guarantees those two are in sync. And so I just believe that if you're going to have the physical ballot needs to be the primary. And then if it's computer readable, cool. But and that's what we have today. I think we were better the other way around, rather than having electronic and then also a second piece of paper, regardless of how it's generated. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Molman. Mr. Latham?
So, I mean, the way I read this actually includes the possibility of using the device possibly known as a Scantron. So I think you could do that with the second clause in 6A. But it also, I think, expands it to just another scenario where you're maybe typing something into your, again, electronic device and then filling out a 3x5 card. But I think you could also do a Scantron under the second clause in 6A. So I think this expands our options rather than restricts them.
And I hear a parliamentary inquiry somewhat buried in there.
It kind of felt, I was almost wondering if I should ask, but sure.
And I'm going to just let this tickle your brain a moment. I don't think it actually would be covered under the second clause. I think it's actually covered under the first one. Produces doesn't mean that the software actually has to do it. It has to mean it has to be produced and it's a conforming physical ballot. I think filling out a Scantron that gets read electronically, I mean, I could see the argument being made under that second clause, but I think it also falls under the first. So I'm just saying that I agree with you just on more grounds than even you articulated, that this would not preclude using Scantrons.
Great. Okay. And yeah, either option.
Either option, I believe. Mr. Martin?
Yeah, I just, I want to say that I share the concerns of, that have been expressed about this, this proposal by Mr. Molman and Dr. Moulton and others, especially, you know, about printers being unreliable and so forth. There are some ways to ameliorate that. Some printers, technology is more reliable than others, and you can do, you know, redundancy and things like that. But generally speaking, you know, printers are a pain in the butt. I also agree that, you know, if you have a paper ballot and an electronic ballot, and that paper ballot goes through anybody's hands, including the delegate who did the vote, you know, they can make changes to that, which I presume would result in a spoiled ballot. I mean, I don't really know. This motion doesn't really address that problem, but I presume that it's addressed somewhere else. Anyway, I just wanted to say that, and I do appreciate the debate here. I don't think we can arrive at a ideal solution for electronic voting at this time, partly because we are in a transition. I repeat what I said at the last meeting, which is that when I have voted electronically in government elections, something that, you know, I always feel like I need to take a shower after I do that, but not getting a paper receipt with my vote in each race or ballot measure. Not getting that from them was a real missing for me. And not only to confirm that they processed my ballot correctly, but also just simply as a record for me to keep so that I would be able to go back and see how I voted on things. Anyway, I guess that's all I have. Once again, I do appreciate the debate and the thoughts of others, and I respect their concerns. Thank you.
What I wanted to add, I do think there probably would be a couple, a few, don't know how many. I don't think it would be many, because people pay all the money to go to convention because they want accurate results. And then you're talking about having to have a majority order a recount for it to even matter that someone thought they were being mischievous and put something different on their physical ballot. The amount of things that would have to be in line for that to ever make a difference is, to me, starting to go, well, you know, monkeys could fly out of my butt. I did a Google search on something, because if we're going to start mining the subjunctive, I would really, this is just fascinating to people in general. Type in flipping electrons and electronic ballots on how actual state elections have been changed by sunspots that have flipped electrons and changed vote totals. So if we're going to start talking about what ifs, I can bring up that what if, you know, there could be some kind of burst that changes, flips ones to zeros. It has happened multiple times. There's some really interesting articles on this. So also remember that a good secretary is going to do a post-convention audit, and they will look at these paper ballots and compare it to what the computer says. And if this looks like it's a big problem, by next convention, we'll know that it's a big problem. But we have to start somewhere, and we can think of what ifs until the cows come home, because we're paranoid libertarians and we're really, really good at that. Is there any further debate? And Ken, I'm going to answer that parliamentary wise. Just in chat, though, I'm going to ask that committee members not debate in chat or bring up important points in chat, because everyone has the right to hear it on the video. Per Roberts, under our bylaws, election results have to be challenged during the convention. There is no cause for legal action after the convention. That's the parliamentary procedure that we're under. The convention can order an entire revote, which they can do now by saying, I think a teller erased my vote and changed it. Again, if everyone's super, super concerned about mining the subjunctive, then vote this down, because I really, really think we're starting to go in some really bizarre circles right now. Mr. Molman.
Number one, I do know about the bit flipping at the sunspot thing. It's real.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I work. Assessors actually, they around to keep that from happening, because, and it was a big thing with Sun Microsystems years and years ago where they tried to cheat it. That was bad. Anyway,
thing you just said about the challenge has to be done at the and I'm just thinking this through about the counting of ballots. So the post-convention audit can't change the results, even if the results are obviously wrong as announced at convention. Once they're announced, that's it. And the post-convention audit shouldn't change.
It
So what
can't.
happens? Okay, I know. So I know for a fact, I remember Paige Sexton got elected, but then didn't, and I remember that happened.
That wasn't
And then what
announced at
happened?
convention.
Yeah, no, it was national convention. She was.
It wasn't
elected as an
announced.
at-large.
No, it wasn't announced at convention. It was said that it would be announced after convention. And
So
before
that-
the chair, and before the chair had announced anything, there was an error while the convention, this is while the delegation chairs were reviewing their totals, an error was brought to the attention and it was corrected before the chair announced the result.
And that does then bring up the other concern I had is we, for the last few conventions, have tallied a handful of races, specifically at-large and judicial, after the close of the convention.
Yeah, and the convention can authorize that, and they've then lost, they have foreclosed unless they, in their motion, their right to challenge. And that's their right to give away their rights. But I want to give you actually a real life example, even though I think he still would have won. I don't remember what, it was probably 2014, you would know, where there were multiple rounds on a chair race. And I think it was Nick's chair race where he won one round by one vote. And then it proceeded to the next round. And I do think Nick would have ended up winning anyway, but he actually did not win that round. Alicia, when she did her recount, there was an error in which somebody else, different people would have been eliminated. It probably would not have made a difference in the final results because he had so much popular support, but there was a round that was proven tabulated wrongly, but it doesn't matter. Just like the recount I didn't order it, that's the wrong way. The recount that I pain in the assly demanded on the at-large race, I forgot what convention it was, where Alicia won by one vote. Even if it had been determined that she didn't, but the recount actually, I think, determined she won by more than one vote. It was just so that we knew where there might be errors and to set delegates' minds at ease, because there were spouses counting votes and there was a lot of distrust. She won fair and square actually by more votes, if I remember correctly. But even if it had been found that she didn't win by one vote, it wouldn't have mattered. She would have kept her seat.
Okay, so, and just to be clear then, what that means is that when we're talking about recounts and basically in layman's terms, the vote is certified and finalized when that final gavel hits, unless the convention body has authorized to let the vote go, the tally happen after the convention. Under normal circumstances, it doesn't matter what happens when the gavel comes down, the convention closes. The post-convention audit is simply there to see if there were issues that could be corrected in the future. It has no bearing whatsoever on the outcome of the race. Okay.
Yeah, and some things that like Alicia had found in at-large races, in one in particular, we had 3 Joe Bs, and there was a lot of confusion as to trying to determine voter intent, because you had Joe Bishop Henchman, Joe Bookman, and there was another Joe B, and a lot of people wrote Joe B. So now the instructions are to write full names. So it gives us better practices. That's the purpose of post-convention audits, is for better practices.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more debate? And actually, I have a question for Jonathan Jacobs, because I don't know the answer to this. I know after convention, it's too late to order a recount, but let's say in a chair's race, does the recount have to be ordered within a certain amount of time within the convention after the chair's race? Or can it be like, what if it was the next day and people talk to each other and are like, oh, that doesn't seem right? Does it have to be like immediately after the chair's race, or can it be at any time during the convention?
I believe off the top of my head, if I may speak, of course,
Yes, yes, please.
okay. I believe off the top of my head, it would be while the convention was in session.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Once you go to the final adjournment, there would be a problem. But if you are doing that at that time, it's okay. And there are some ways to extend things out if you really needed to.
Right, but under ordinary procedure, you know, the delegates would have to do something affirmatively to extend things out. Okay, thank you. Mr. Molman, I saw you had your hand raised and then down.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly actually ask if it would be okay to ask, since this is all related. There was some talk amongst one caucus eons ago of dragging the convention out on purpose to then basically try to undo the elections that happened and do them over again with who was left. I don't know if that's legit or not, but into this discussion at all, but it's something I would like to get clarification on at some time.
I'd have to know a lot more details on it. That's something I hadn't heard of, but I never underestimate the creativeness of people. Okay, Mr. Jacobs, go ahead.
Yes, Madam Chairman, if I may, I could probably answer that question, but it would probably be applicable to do it after the meeting. It's not one of the thing I would be suggesting, but I could probably answer Mr. Molman's question.
Yeah, maybe you get with Mr. Molman afterwards, you know, so he has some clarity on that. Okay, is there any, and I'm sorry if you hear me chewing, Wayne brought me dinner. I hadn't eaten in a while. Is there any further debate on this? Okay, we are ready for a vote. A yes vote will pass this out of committee and we will move to the next agenda item. A no vote will fail it and we'll still move to the next agenda item. Ms. Arrowood?
Yes, Arrowwood, I'm going to say no. Rocco,
Yes.
Sazelsky,
Yes.
Latham,
Yes.
Frank Martin,
Yes.
Ken Molman,
No.
Tom Rowlett,
Yes.
Mike Ruffo,
Yes.
Dave Roberson, sitting in for Mr. Seebeck. Has Mr. Seebeck returned, perhaps? If not, I'm calling on Dave Roberson.
Yes, I vote yes. Can you
All
hear me?
right, thank you, sir. Yes.
Seems my AirPods are having a little bit of an issue today, so apologies for that.
Madam Chair, we have 7 yes, 2 no at this point. Do you care to vote? Madam Chair?
I see I'm muted. Okay,
All
and I will not be voting. That part
Right.
passed. At first, I thought I actually spoke incorrectly. Mr. Latham was probably just about to remind me, we're not moving on to the next agenda item yet because there's other portions of this. That portion passed, but we still needed to add to Rule 1, item number 3, vote to authorize electronic voting. And did we also have to do 3-2? Mr. Roberson, I believe, Mr. Latham.
And the short answer is I really don't know. I honestly thought we were all good except for this last piece. But I
Well,
could be wrong.
I don't think, well, I'll have to ask the committee, unless you guys voted on this during the meeting. I was not here when Mr. Molman was sharing. Was the rest of this voted on, Mr. Molman?
Madam Chair, I do believe that we voted on everything up until the point where we've been working. If there's anything after that, then we have not voted on that. But we had worked our way to that point, and that was when I paused because I wanted to make sure you had your say on it.
All right, well then, we didn't then get to Rule 7.
I
It
believe
looks
that's
like
probably correct.
Rule 7.3, there's some strikeouts. So, Mr. Latham, because I hadn't touched that. If you'd like to speak to this.
I'm reading it. It's been a minute.
It's been a hot minute, I know. And we do have to also vote on the proviso, which I would assume hasn't been done yet as well.
So I believe the intention of this amendment was basically the existing language is that the party's nominee for president would have the same process as the vice president. And this strikeout would say, no, we're actually going to do it differently. So the president, and that's why we're striking that out, is just to say we might be able to use different processes for president and vice presidential nominees. And there's been some discussion about that, and maybe just one was, maybe the intention was we would do round by round, multi-round for president, and then go, to one of our electronic methods for vice president to compare and contrast the two methods.
I'm struggling with this because this is all under electronic voting, and I think this is kind of out of scope for this amendment. And I know there was talk about having, I don't like calling it an omnibus proposal, but we did that rewrite to clean up the language about balloting procedures and all of that. And it was mentioned at that time that the nomination procedures need to be standardized. And this seems to belong there. This just doesn't seem related at all to electronic voting. Did you want to argue with?
Oops, sorry.
I mean, would you have some objection to us considering this when we get to talking about standardizing the nomination language? Because that's what this is under, nominations.
Right. I mean, and the short answer is I don't have an objection, but I think when we were just looking at all the pieces that might be touched by authorizing electronic voting, this language came up just because current existing language mandates the same procedure for both presidential and vice presidential nominations. And I think we wanted to give ourselves the capacity to actually use different procedures. So one would be electronic and,
But this isn't about balloting at all. It's only about nominations.
Chosen by the same procedure. And that's, so you see that.
Okay.
So, but you think, I guess I would need to look at the original bylaws. You think
Yeah.
that,
Let me see here.
Madam Chair, is it in order to make motions at this time?
Yes, it is. I'm reading this because I'm just super puzzled about what it actually does. So go ahead, Mr. Bracco.
So I would like to move that we add back in everything that has been stricken out in 7.3. For
This
the
hasn't been-
exact reason that everyone's confused about why it's here. I think
the-
people are going to be confused on the floor as well. So I'd like to
According
just
to
not touch
Mr.
it here.
Molman, this part hasn't been voted on. So
But it has been proposed, has it not?
it's been proposed and we can say, we're going to consider this at a later time when we deal more broadly with nominations or later, if there's no objection from the committee and Mr. Latham didn't seem to have an objection, we could withdraw this part of this proposal and keep it sheerly on electronic balloting. And that does not preclude him from bringing this up again later.
Can I just throw out, by the way, so it says rule 7.3 here, but I guess in our
Yes.
bylaws, it's 7.4. So if we're trying to follow along in our
Okay.
actual bylaws. And again, in looking at that, I just say that's the concern, is that we're mandating the same process for both president and vice president. And so I just thought, while we're touching on that process, one would be round by round, one would be and you actually see earlier on in that rule 7 that round by round process, which we're not touching with this electronic voting proposal. But I think just in contemplation that if we pass this and we're mandating the same, we would basically say we can't do electronic voting for vice president.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, if we're allowed, if we're permitted, I think you're getting somewhat confused with the RCV proposal. I mean, if we're doing electronic balloting, we're doing it for all of them, and they will all be round by round, because right now we don't have any kind of a rule that allows for anything but round by round.
Okay, and maybe you're right there, and I am kind of looking ahead that we would have an RCV process in place.
Yeah,
So,
I think this is where you might want to
Maybe we need to revisit that.
when we're talking, because RCV is next, I think.
Okay, although I think that's just for officers, but it's been a minute on that one too.
Well,
Anyway.
I would put a pin in that, Mr. Latham, and because I mean, reading the room, I don't think this is going to pass with an electronic balloting proposal.
Okay, yep, I've got zero problem with saving it for later.
Okay, is there any objection to the rest of the from the rest of the committee?
Yeah, Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Mo-
just as a point of parliamentary procedure or inquiry, rather, excuse me, what you're proposing to do here is divide this part out and table to a date undetermined or whatever. I can't remember, but you're basically saying this is going away for now. Is that correct?
Well, actually, Mr. Latham withdrew this part of the proposal because we had been voting on this piecemeal. So
Okay.
he withdrew it, which gives him full
Okay.
rights to reintroduce it at another time.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bracco.
Had we been voting on this? I don't remember us voting on this piecemeal, to be honest.
That is what, okay, here's where we're gonna start getting into arguing about how many angels are dancing on the head of a pin. It was Mr. Molman's recollection that the other ones had been passed out of committee. But what I'm going to do to be safe, Mr. Latham withdrew this part of his proposal. We're going to take one final vote on everything again, which will be all of the language we passed for 6, as well as this had been workshopped during that meeting I was missing, which is adding vote to authorize electronic balloting. The way I'm treating this almost is like a motion to reconsider, since there's some doubt on the committee as to whether 3 has been passed and these changes to Rule 3 have been passed. Mr. Molman believes they have, but I'd like the committee to be sure.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I just as a point of clarification or whatever, we amended the motion. We did not pass any of this out of committee.
okay, gotcha.
We were simply working on them like we just did with the last piece for the last 4 meetings. We were just working on perfecting the language, and we did not
Okay.
have a final vote on this motion. So it is, I would believe, time
Okay.
to do that.
Perfect then. So that last part has been withdrawn. So now, unless there can be further amendments then to Rule 1, which was to add in the vote to authorize electronic balloting, which remember is subject to all the rules we just passed, including the prior notice of the system to be used so that nobody is ambushed on the floor. And then Rule 3, which was workshopped in the meeting I was not at, but if people want to take a look at that again to make sure there's nothing, I'm going to read this aloud because I find sometimes reading it aloud, you hear an error. So Rule 3, Section 2. Each delegation shall conduct its vote electronically or by written ballot delivered to the delegation chair, who shall tabulate the votes on a delegation tally sheet provided for this purpose. If by written ballot, the delegation chair then submits the delegation's tally sheet in a sealed envelope containing each of the delegates' ballots to the tellers. When all delegations have submitted their votes, the convention chair shall declare the voting closed. After each delegation voting by written ballot has tabulated its own vote totals before submitting the totals to the secretary, the tellers shall review the ballot tabulation for accuracy, and co-sign the delegation totals. After the secretary or the tellers have recorded all delegation submissions, the state-by-state delegation totals for each candidate or choice shall be displayed on a projection screen for each delegation to review for accuracy. During the period of time allotted for such votes, the business of the convention shall continue without interruption, and the rest of this wasn't changed. I do see a problem here, actually, and it's not with any of the changed language. It's just Rule 3 is not written very well. And if Mike Seebeck was here, he would notice this as well. It says, forget about the added language, because I'm going to skip that for now. As it used to say, or before we propose these changes, each delegation shall conduct its vote by written ballot delivered to the delegation chair. That isn't ever how we've ever done this. We don't deliver. Okay, thank you, Mr. Seebeck. We've never delivered written ballots to the delegation chair. We delivered to the delegation chair the delegation tally sheet, which is mentioned later on in the sentence. This sentence, forget about the electronic part for a second. It should say each delegation shall conduct its vote by written ballot. I'm trying to think of which I don't even know how to reword this, but we don't deliver written ballots to the delegation chairs. What I'm thinking, however, is I take that perhaps Mike and I take a look at this later and this be a separate proposal, because it really doesn't have anything to do with electronic voting. This is a problem in the original language, which has existed forever. And I suppose in theory, perhaps they've considered us providing 3x5 cards to be this, but this isn't how things have been done. Mr. Seebeck.
Yeah, let's look at this separately because we have, I thought we did hand out the blank index cards to the delegates in the past,
But,
the delegations.
but these aren't written ballots delivered to the delegation chairs. It might be ballot forms. But it says written ballot, like we're delivering to them something with writing on it.
Yeah, it's poorly worded.
It's poorly worded, but I think it's something that does need to be fixed, but it's out of, it's doesn't have anything to do with electronic balloting that I think Mike and I and others, but the reason I said Mike and I is because he's been my head teller for a while, that this needs to be a separate proposal so that we're not confusing the delegates with multiple subjects in one proposal. But I see there's a bunch of hands up. Mr.
Let's talk about it
Roulette,
offline.
yeah, so Mr. Roulette, Mr. Bracco, and Mr. Latham.
I believe a 3x5 index card counts as a written ballot for the purposes of this section.
I think that's probably how it's been interpreted, because it's been this way for probably 20 years. Mr. Bracco?
I do just want to remind everyone that immediately prior to this discussion, debate, all of the electronic stuff, we did do a significant overhaul of Rule 3 and I think pulled stuff out of other rules. So I think even if this were perfected, we'd have to do some kind of like merge anyway.
Mhm.
So I don't know. Are we doing rework if we're touching this?
I think you're correct. I was starting to think that as well. I had mentioned to the committee before that we have all these multiple proposals on the same sections, but dealing with different topic matters. And that as we near the end of the year, we're going to have a meeting where we smooth them all together. So perhaps you are correct there. I think I'll know this better when I prepare the document for the next town hall. But I think you are correct, Mr. Bracco. Mr. Latham.
I just want to say, even though, yeah, I agree, it's poorly worded. One way to interpret the existing language is that, just when you read each delegation shall conduct its vote by written ballot delivered to the delegation chair. So the delegates, right?
Oh, so
put
you're
on a
saying the
piece of paper.
delegates deliver the written
Yeah,
ballots.
right.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay.
And we've of course done it that way for a
Yeah.
while.
It's just so, some of this wording, I think you're correct. And I also think Mr. Roulette's correct too, that it could be the giving of the 3x5 cards. Though I have to tell you, in 2016, we did it on corners of napkins because they ran out of cards. But I think you're correct. Okay, so in dealing with electronic balloting, now that I've read it aloud, and you can see the language in blue, so it's all on this one page here, all the changes, the language in blue and red. Are there further amendments or further debate? And same thing for adding up here, number 3, vote to authorize electronic balloting. I have a question for the committee. I'm not making an amendment. Someone else can if they think my point is well taken or not. Should that say vote whether to?
I think that's implied.
Okay. Yeah, I get your point. What's the question?
Vote whether to adopt an agenda right below it.
I know I was going to say the same. Well, that's a whole other thing we need to deal with. The agenda is in our standing rules. That item should not be there. Like, this has been a controversy for multiple conventions. What does that even mean, vote to adopt the agenda? It's already been adopted. It's in our convention rules. It would take a 2/3 vote and it would be either a suspension of the convention rules, in which case it doesn't need to be here, or it would be an amendment to it, in which case it shouldn't be here. That number 4 should not exist, but that's a different topic. Mr. Latham.
I was gonna make a joke, but I was hoping maybe we can move along.
Yes.
But even call to order, maybe we don't want to be called to order. I mean, you can.
Vote whether to be called to order. Okay, are there any further amendments or debate? All right, hearing none, this will be the final vote on passing everything and moving on to the next agenda item. I'm going to ask if there's any objections. Now, I know on item 6, there were people who voted no, but okay, no, we're just going to do a roll call. Because I figured Mr. Mullman probably will want to register his no.
Madam Chair,
Mr.
can I just, because I'm looking, I think at what you have up on the screen,
Yes,
do we need to remove that purple language further below, or is that
Where?
assumed?
that's assumed. Our
Okay.
record is clear.
All right.
And I'll do that when I move this into the past folder. I do that cleanup. Mr. Mullman.
I just want to verify, we're voting on the entire proposal
entire
right now,
thing.
not just the, okay, I want to make sure what we're voting on.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. So Ms. Arrowood.
Yes, I was going to just double check here. Is number 4 about the agenda stricken then?
No, I was saying it's something we need to think about.
Okay. All right, thanks.
You're welcome. So if you would take the roll call vote.
All right, Arrowwood. I'm going to say no. Rocco,
Yes.
Sizelski,
Yes.
Latham,
Yes.
Martin,
Yes.
Molman,
No.
Rowlett,
Yes.
Rufo,
Yes.
Seebeck.
Beg pardon, what are we voting on again?
Passing the entire proposal.
Oh, abstain.
You abstain? All right, so. Madam Chair, at this point, we have 6 yes, 2 no, and 1 abstain.
I will not be voting.
All right.
Yay, now what I did prematurely. This has passed out of committee. We are moving to the next agenda item, which is going to be very fun. Let
Oh.
me find where.
This is
I-
R,
Oh, P, I think it's Q.
Q, right.
Yeah, so this is add convention rule 8, add RCV for party officers. Let me take these proposal Ps off the screen first and pull up proposal R. We haven't seen this in a while, and I had some notes that I haven't looked at in a while. So let's just briefly peruse these. Here is proposal
Madam-
R. Yes,
Well, I'm looking at the spreadsheet, and don't we have amendment of preamble or as Q, and then rank choices R?
one moment. I think we moved ahead. One moment. Let's go to the folder here. I'm going to go up here and look at the master proposal sheet. We moved, I believe, ahead on this. Yeah, we passed this. I think it's because we were dealing with this subject matter and we moved it ahead because I have in our notes that we passed this, the amendment of preamble.
Gotcha. And green
without-
means it's
yeah.
passed,
Yeah,
just like S. Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
without objection on June 15th. I mean, yeah, June 15th. Okay, R. This is my here's your original one. Let me get my toolbar out of the way. And we are coming up on 15 minutes before the meeting will end. And I'm giving the floor to you, Mr. Latham. This is your proposal. I don't know if you need some time to look it over, if you're prepared to speak to it right now.
Well, I hope we're all familiar with the idea of ranked choice voting, but if not, it's just rather than having person vote for one, you can rank your candidates in order of preference, and then through a counting process, basically the candidate or candidates receiving the lowest vote totals get eliminated. Their second and subsequent choices are redistributed to the remaining candidates. And the one, there's many benefits of that in terms of saving time. We don't have to have multiple rounds of voting. We can possibly elect a majority winner in a single election. And there are some various iterations of ranked choice voting, and this one selects some tie-breaking rules that I think in some of our discussions are more preferred by some than others. We can get into that, I suppose, as if we get deeper into the discussion on this proposal. But
And I will read it aloud before I call him Mr. Molman. And the chair just realized she forgot one thing on the last proposal. And I'm going to ask if there's any objection. There was a proviso to the last proposal that none of those changes would take effect. They're actually impossible to take effect because it requires advance notice of an electronic voting system. But in order to assuage concerns, I'm asking if there's any objection to that proviso, which is the exact same proviso that's at the bottom of this one that says this amendment shall take effect on the final adjournment of the convention at which it's adopted. I'm asking if there's objection that we are adding that proviso to P, which we just passed. And Mr. Molman, are you objecting, or you just have your hand raised for this?
I have my hand raised for this. I want to
Okay.
make very clear I am not objecting to
Okay.
the proviso.
Okay, now before I call upon you for debate, which you will be first, I'd like to just read this language out loud. Not everyone is as familiar with RCV. So it's nomination for party officers. This is officers only. I'm not going to read the language where it's being deleted. You can read that on the screen. It's how we've done it for years. Hopefully everyone on this committee is familiar with that. But it would be striking out our typical election procedure and substituting in this. Officer elections shall be conducted using ranked choice voting. For each office, a majority vote of all the ballots cast in that round shall be necessary and sufficient for election. Ballots shall allow delegates to rank their choices in order of preference. In cases in which no candidate receives a majority of first choice votes, the candidate with the fewest votes shall be eliminated, and the ballots of voters indicating that eliminated candidate as their first choice shall be redistributed to the remaining candidates according to the next choice indicated on those ballots. The secretary and tellers approved by the secretary shall then recount the ballots. D, if no candidate has a majority of votes cast, the process of eliminating the candidates with the fewest votes, redistributing according to the next choice on those ballots, and then recounting shall be repeated until one candidate has a majority. E, in the event of a tie in any round in which, which makes a difference in which candidate advances, ties shall be broken by retaining the candidate that had the most first choice votes. And if still a tie, then the second choice results, etc. If this method results in a tie up through the current round, the tie shall be broken randomly. The secretary shall retain the record of all voting rounds and make it available to delegates upon request. The secretary shall announce the winner of the election after votes have been fully tabulated. The secretary's announcement of the election outcome shall include results from each voting round. I'm going to put some comments in here for people just to consider. This is somewhat unorthodox for me to do this, but I don't think you meant to do this, Mr. Bracco. Mr. Latham. The secretary does not announce. That is always the prerogative of the chair to announce results. Just putting that out there. The secretary is here, I might say to the chair, this is what our counts show, but then the chair announces winners. That's completely to keep the authority vested entirely in the chair and not transfer any authority to the secretary. Okay, Mr. Molman.
All right. I know I want to amend this. And my intent to amend is to make it all single winner elections other than president, which really only brings in V. POTUS. And to that extent, to start this off, I want to bring back the language we literally just struck out of the last thing, and put it in here as an amendment, because we need to separate that. And then what is currently 1A.
I'm listening
that
to
A-
you first because I want to make sure I'm understanding. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. The A would no longer be a subset of 1. It's going to have its own number, and I can't see the full thing because I'm on my phone. I
Yeah.
apologize, but I want a real number there. And then all the others underneath will go A, B, C accordingly because they're part of that. And then the word officer is going to be struck in what is currently labeled as A.
Okay, here's part of the problem.
Right.
This is a very substantive
I know.
amendment, and we are down to 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I agree. We're not going to get very far. I will withdraw my motion. Since I didn't even finish making it, I will stop and say, never mind. I will write this up in email. And that way the committee can consider it in the next 2 weeks or whenever we meet again to do business, or in between if they so choose. But I believe there's an appetite to do this for every race except for president. And that's why I was making the motion. And we can talk about that after this meeting adjourns to see if that's really true. Because if it's not, then I'm not going to waste everybody's time either. So.
Okay, I had all kinds of notes. Here's what I'm going to suggest, and I know I'm jumping ahead of people in line, but I'm trying to keep the meeting running orderly. There's things in here I think that are inconsistent potentially with electronic voting. I'm not next in line, but I would highly suggest that somebody postpone this to the next meeting to give workshopping opportunities, because I think I gave Mr. Latham some food for thought. Ken Molman might have. I'm going to throw something else out there. All of this mechanics of how ranked choice voting works, I personally don't think is necessary. I think there's a definition already that this is way too wordy, but others might disagree. But Mr. Bracco's next, but I highly suggest we move to postpone this. But Mr. Bracco, you have the floor.
Sure. Since there's a lot of amendments, or at least ideas for them being thrown out, I'm not going to actually, I just want to comment, not make any motion. So if we could go down to E, please.
Yes.
The very bottom, the very last thing, the tie shall be broken randomly. What does that mean? I think we need some specificity there.
Okay,
Coin flip, dice, whatever, something specific. That's my comment.
We've never had that before. We have a custom in the party, and custom is binding if it doesn't conflict with your rules, and that the secretary has a 20-sided die. That's been the longstanding custom in the party for as long back as anyone remembers. I actually think we can use the technical language of forward tie breaking or backwards tie breaking, which is what this is trying to describe. I do think the committee needs to research both forms of tie breaking to see what they prefer. But so Mr. Rogers,
We see D on the screen.
sure.
As I heard you read it, it sounded as though when we remove a candidate for having the fewest votes, it sounded like it was only on the first round. So for subsequent rounds, we're keeping all the candidates in for all further subsequent rounds. So that probably needs to be clarified in our future discussion too. Whether we
And
want to keep removing them, to keep removing the lowest count candidate at each round, rather than just only the first round.
and I'll also add, there's no provisions on how we handle NOTA. I would have no idea how to handle NOTA. We have to make decisions on that, and that's a huge debate in the party. Mr. Latham.
Sure. And can I move to make that quick change to G to swap out secretary with chair in those two places?
Yeah, well, the secretary would, oh, you mean just in G? You
The
certainly
announcement
can.
part.
Yeah, you certainly can. So, Mr. Latham, just so that we don't forget this, I'm gonna ask, is there any objection in G to where it says the secretary shall announce and the secretary's announcement to make it the chair shall announce and the chair's announcement?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I
Molman?
don't necessarily want to object, but I believe elsewhere in our bylaws or rule today, it talks about the secretary shall display the results of elections on a big screen.
It does. That's
And-
not
and
an
I think that-
announcement, though. This is announcement of the
Right.
winner.
This is the winner, of the election.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I'm so sorry. Yes. Wait, the secretary's announcement of the election outcome shall include the results from each round. Okay, got it. Perfect. Okay, my bad.
Mr. Martin,
Yeah, I move to postpone further.
well, we have a pending amendment first. And
Okay.
I was asking if there was any objection.
No, I have no objection.
Okay, Mr. Bracco, did you have an objection?
With this, I guess what Mr. Molman had said, maybe, but I want to just throw out an idea. Why don't we just strike secretaries from that second sentence? Just not replace with chair, just because there's like the secretary displays, the chair announces, whatever. The announcement. We don't need to specify whose announcement.
Okay, we are out of time.
Yeah.
That
So no,
wasn't,
okay, I will not object then if nobody else cares.
because there's gonna be all kinds of amendments to this thing. I think Mr. Latham's purpose was that we just don't forget about it. I think we all realize that this is going to get amended a lot. So no objections. We're gonna stick chair in here. That doesn't mean that this paragraph is gonna remain in here exactly like this and that it can't be amended further. The only amendment you can't make is to re-stick it back in secretary, unless you do a motion to reconsider. Ms. Arrowood,
Did Ken Molman withdraw?
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
it wasn't official. Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, we don't need a motion to postpone because we are out of time. So unless there's a motion to extend, we don't need a motion to postpone. This can be workshopped on the list. So is there a motion, and we can talk about it further after adjournment. Is there a motion to extend time? There's no motion to extend time. So we'll pick up right here, understanding that people will be proposing perhaps alternate language on the list. We're going to get to some good language. There's definitely an appetite to discuss this. Mr. Latham?
Sure, just so continuing our conversation informally on this proposal.
Let me adjourn us first. So
Oh.
so the chair will declare this meeting adjourned at 8:47 Mountain, at 10:47 Eastern. Go ahead, Mr. Latham.
Sure. So I had drafted this in contemplation that maybe electronic balloting wasn't going to be, an option for us or passed. And also remember that electronic balloting, we're not even looking at maybe doing that until the